Welcome to the Black Entrepreneur Experience podcast, inside the business, buzz, and brilliance of Black entrepreneurs. Here is your host, Dr. Frances Richards.
What happens in Vegas goes all over the world on Black Entrepreneur Experience, episode 54. Thank you for joining us for Black Entrepreneur Experience. This is where we shine the light on the most successful Black entrepreneurs in the world. I'm your host, Dr. Frances Richards. Today, I am so honored to have with us Byron Russell. He's founder of Byron Russell LLC, a consulting company based in Utah. They work with corporations and foundations with a strong focus on ideas, connections, and results. Welcome, Byron.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
You know what? I've given our audience a very brief bio about your company. Why don't you fill in the gaps and share with us what you'd like us to know about your company and yourself?
Well, I live in Salt Lake City. I wasn't born here. I was born in Washington, D.C., and just like a lot of other people, you tend to migrate to where you enjoy being. I think there's kind of this idea, this creative economy that people end up where they love being in their environment. And one thing that I did notice by living here in Salt Lake since 1992 was I love the mountains. I love the sense of space and beauty, and the people are friendly. We have a great airport. I could go on and on. But then there's some things about this community that you want to change. And having the opportunity to work in many areas in Salt Lake City, including the arts. Utah Symphony is where I started. I was able to actually dig deeper into trying to create something more and lasting, and that is what we call now ZAP, which is the Zoo Arts and Parks Tax. 0.1% is funding the major arts organizations, and I think I've alluded to the fact that I love the arts. But I saw that link missing, and I used the opportunity to apply my passion, if you will. And that passion aligned me with some very active, generous philanthropers in our community who shared the same vision that I had. And while I was working at the Symphony and getting involved in other boards and organizations, I found myself very distracted to some degree by my passions and trying to change this community or to help change this community. And I decided that those distractions should actually be my principal business. And working with people who shared those passions seemed to be the angle that I would take. Basically, my network would really be benefited by some of my outreach and their interests to make a difference, to make a change in our community. And so, you do these things for fun, for free. At some point, you have to decide if you want to just jump in full steam and offer, whether it's a corporation or a foundation or an individual, some deliverables and say, I want to help you maximize what you believe in. And I wish to offer my services with my connections and with my skill set and opportunity to help you align your brand identity or just your interests in making a difference in the community. So Byron Russell is named obviously after myself. It was a very difficult thing to do because it's a little strange to name your company after yourself. But after all, that's the brand that I represent, which is me as an individual in this community who people know and trust to help them with their goals. And it could be companies, it could be municipal governments, it could be individuals or foundations, organizations that want to make a difference. I hope that my business is continuing to achieve that.
So tell us about, how did you know, what was that aha moment, Byron, that you knew that you were going to be successful?
Well, I'm not sure that I ever think or have come to the conclusion that I'm successful. I think I'm always striving to be more successful. However, at some point, a light turned on when I was giving a speech to an organization called the Utah Technology Council. And they wanted me to speak about how to build a network. And I decided to talk about building a network through passion because, as I mentioned before, that's what I'm very familiar with. That's what I do, and that's who I am. However, I was working in sort of various organizations, and then I realized that the things that I was telling them about how to build a network through passion, I really wasn't living that. And so after I gave that speech, and after pretty much every single person in that room emailed me, called me, and said, gosh, I want to have your network. Just tell me your secrets. I realized that I wasn't sharing my own secrets with myself. So I had a little conversation with Byron and said, look, I mean, you've just given these people advice on how to make a difference, how to, get their business from 10 million to 100 million, and how to network in certain ways, how to maximize their investors' funds. Why don't you invest in yourself? And that's really when the light turned on, and I decided I am going to start my own consulting business. And I was a little afraid because I quit a job, that those things that pay you. And, I just decided this is where I'm going to go. So I met with a wonderful mentor, Burton Gordon, who is from Chicago. He's a Chicago banker and a very dear friend and a smart guy, and said, look, it's time for you to stop working for everybody else because you're making them rich. You need to work for yourself. And I don't know about making myself rich, but I actually feel that my, opportunity to start my own business would be something that I should really do. So I did it, a little afraid, and he was my first client. But after that, I had some great opportunities with Adobe, and Chevron reached out to me. And then when others began to see that I was doing this with very recognized brand names, they came up to me and also said, well, gosh, I mean, if you can help them be more profitable and align their brand, why don't we hire you? And so that kind of cascaded into some interest and, in some cases, relationships that were mutually beneficial.
So when you talked about you quit your job, a lot of people that are looking to start businesses, they want to know that piece about financing their company. How do you, what was the capital that you used? Did you bootstrap the business? Did you do exactly that? Did you just say, okay, I'm done in terms of quitting your job? Did you do a strategic plan? Can you take us on that journey?
Well, it was a little frightening. So fasten your seatbelts, because I just decided, I'm just going to do this thing. And fortunately, my mentor, who I spoke of, said, I know what it's like as a banker for you to take this risk. And I have a need that I've been hoping that you might help me with. And I decided to allow him to be my first client, which, when I say allow him, that really meant that I was basically severing the cords of what is a, quote, job. And basically, I was fortunate enough to have somebody who believed in me and saw some value that he could gain. And I decided to jump in and just go with it. Just feel my intuitive nature about trusting people who trusted me. And so, to answer your question, no, I really didn't do a strategic plan as much as I also didn't really have a financial plan. I just had a person who said, I believe in you. I'm going to help you through your first, 3 to 4 months. And you might want to just try this because I think you'll be great at it. And I think both the belief that he had in me and the knowledge that people saw that I was available for hire, so to speak, basically led to a sustainable and great opportunity with a lot of organizations and foundations and corporations who saw the value that I could provide them.
So tell us, you mentioned about the success, and you were saying that you're always striving for success. So I'm going to ask you, the first question is, tell us about how long have you been in business? And the second one is, I would like you to define success for us according to Byron.
Well, I've been in business beyond 6 years, and my measurement of success is waking up every day enjoying what you do. And I know that sounds a little trite, maybe, and I know that sounds maybe repeated with a little vacuum kind of sort of sound. However, I do believe in that, because if you don't really love what you do, you can't possibly be successful. I think that when you wake up every day and you say, one day I'm going to do what I really want to do, so therefore I'm going to work really hard to be successful so that I will know what success is. Sometimes we don't know what that success is, and I think, a lot of folks quote what the journey is about and not necessarily the destination. And so I would reiterate that, the destination is not necessarily my measurement of success as much it is the journey. And as long as the journey is something you can achieve and something you can sustain and something you can tweak every once in a while, then I think that's success. Because truly, I can't imagine one day when I would just say, well, I've reached the pinnacle of success. I've done everything I need. I've made all the money I need. I've made all of the impact I can. Somehow, I just don't see that as a viable measurement. But I do see a journey as a little different.
So you talk about passion, and you talk about waking up every day and doing what you love, which is your definition of success, an amazing definition. Talk to our audience. How do you get there? And was this always the path that you had taken in your career?
Well, I think you take different paths and you figure out which one is going in a direction that will get you to a place that you feel is a worthy destination. But, I don't know. I think that and frame your question again, because I want to make sure that I tell your viewers what you're trying to.
So a lot of people, I agree with you 100% about, I love your definition of success is, you wake up every day and do what you love. And I believe, and this is my statistic, I believe 80%, and I even think it's higher, really hate what they do. And I think that they're living a life of default, not necessarily a life of design. And what I'm hearing you say is that you are living a life of design because you love what you do and you do what you love. So I'm saying, how did you get there? You talked about, starting out in DC, ending up in Utah, and you've had several different paths that have taken you on this amazing journey. And so you are now this successful entrepreneur. Talk to our audience about how do they get to that point of waking up every day, doing what they love, really finding their passion.
I think it might sound easy, but I think at some point you have to recognize what it means to be authentic in your life and with those around you. And if you don't really discover or use a lot of your effort and thought process and your soul searching to recognize authenticity, it's almost as if you are, kind of swimming upstream. You're going against the tide. You are really fighting something because you think, well, I'm going to really swim against the tide and go upstream because I want to be in this place. But even though it's maybe not a place that you really should be, maybe you see other people in that place. Maybe you think, oh, look, they're at that destination, but maybe that's not your pathway. And I think, you have to ask yourself, well, who are you? And what makes you interested, excited, passionate, and effective at what you do? And if somehow the authentic self doesn't recognize how that self can actually better themselves by being more like themselves, which sometimes you might say, well, why would you want to be more like yourself if you have some flaws, or if you're not perfect, or if you could be better? Well, I think those are all attainable, but they aren't attainable unless you discover really who you are and potentially who you aren't. And so, again, waking up every day and reminding yourself who you are. Sometimes you kind of forget because you have a lot of meetings and you got to get your deadlines done and you have to show up on time. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to say, well, what is it that I'm doing when I get up in the morning? Why am I going to this meeting? Why do I have this deadline? And that's not something you should do reflexively, and it isn't something you should do at the moment. It's really a long-range plan of, well, what would make my world better, and what would make me better, and what would make me happy doing that? And so I think if you outline that, I think that's probably called a strategic plan. Maybe it's a little simplistic, but I don't think you have to go through a huge exercise with a huge committee and a number of people to sometimes figure out something as simple as, what does it take to succeed in being yourself?
So, Byron, tell us, what is one daily or weekly habit that you do consistently that has given you the greatest success?
Well, this might not sound like maybe what, your listeners want to hear, but, I wake up every morning around 4:30 and I make exercise my priority. And I do that for several reasons. One is, no matter how successful you are, your health, your physical health, is paramount to, I think, one's ability to achieve many other things. And maybe that's not a priority in people's lives, but, you read inspiring articles on people. I remembered reading an article on Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. And in some sense, it was talking about his development of the Apple Watch. And what that meant to him was that he himself had personally found the need to exercise every day. I mean, the guy is just an animal when it comes to, I think, cycling is his forte. And so I look to people like that, and I say to myself, well, I like that part of what they do, and I feel in myself this is what I love to do. And so, I get up first thing in the morning, and I find that moment of solitude, truly, when I say solitude, I'm in an exercise area with other people, or I might be on the bike trail, mountain biking in the mountains or wherever, and there are people around me, but there is a sense of solitude and a new beginning every day. And I think that, going to bed knowing that you're making yourself in preparation for this, the next day of your health, making challenges and even things like fitness, to me, is an alignment to the parallel goals that one can have in their business life or their personal life. And I think it's, kind of a three-legged stool. You can't just one day say, I'm just going to concentrate on my fitness, and then that one part of the stool then collapses because you aren't simultaneously concentrating on your personal life and your business life. And so I do see them as a three-legged stool, but I also see the priority that I place in front of myself, which is to wake up with a purpose every morning and have some kind of goal that will make me feel like a better person, and make that analogous to the challenges that I'm facing in business, and think to myself, okay, this is a challenging need that a client might have, but if I could, run that extra mile this morning, I can go a little bit for this client.
So when you talk about, Byron, waking up with a purpose every morning, do you set goals prior to your morning? Like, do you set goals the night before, or do you set goals that morning? And if yes, are you using some type of technology or some type of tracking system in reference to setting your goals, and waking up with a purpose may not necessarily mean that you're setting goals. So if it's a different answer, don't let me back you into that.
Well, so, I do believe that one has to have some short-term, long-term, and even, middle-term goals. And, I look at a trajectory of where I think my business should be. Sometimes there's a danger of going too far out into the hemisphere, because you might find that that might not be the right path to continue on. I mean, I know some people who've actually studied medicine, and they knew from the time they were in junior high school they wanted to be a doctor, and they went through that path. They set the path. They did their medical work, their studies, and then they realized, well, you know what? I really want to be a writer. And so sometimes, when you set these long range goals without any ability to adapt to what we talked about before, which is sometimes, you discover your passion and your authentic self that you check in with every once in a while, has to be calibrated. So what I do is I tend to think about a trajectory of 3 to 5 years of what I can see the business doing, and then every year I kind of sort of re-gauge that, and then honing down to once a week, every Monday, I meet with my team and go over what it is we are trying to achieve to meet this bigger goal of this yearly goal and this maybe long trajectory that we talked about. And then pretty much every night before I go to bed, I just kind of look at my little iCalendar and make sure that I have an idea of what I'm going to be prepared to do, not only the next day, but the week. And then I just, for fun, I can share with you, I kind of color code them so that I have, some things are green, some are red, some are orange, some are yellow. And if I don't see that balance on my calendar, there's something maybe out of sync. In other words, if there's too much, if there's too much social, if there's too much business development, if there's too much client focus, if there's too much, I can't say there's ever too much exercise, but I do believe that it's important to really view, your life as a picture, and that picture has to have a balance. And I go back to the three-legged stool, and am I achieving everything I need to in order to accomplish that end goal?
So tell us, Byron, who are your top 2 influencers, and what lessons did they teach you?
Well, fortunately, they're not past tense. One is a very important person in my life, Geraldine White-Dreyfus. She is truly, how it's so fabulous to have somebody who you find as a role model and a mentor, but also as your dearest friend. And Geraldine is bigger than life. She is the founder of the Utah Film Center, on a board which I serve here in Salt Lake City, and we present almost 200 free screenings a year to the community to tell stories about, whether it's the environment or whether it's about civil rights or LGBT rights or a variety of topical things that documentary can provide. Geraldine is a person who has truly changed the world, I would say, because film, I think, tells a story, and it helps us to shape our opinions. She had 8 films in Sundance this year. One of them was Step, which is getting a lot of press. It's about these women in Baltimore, these Black women in Baltimore who shape their lives through this concept or this dance, if you will. And there are just so many other things that we do as a team and we work on. And I learned from her on her incredible, generous giving, on her amazing acceptance and inclusion and creativity and openness. And then another person I really have great sort of respect for, and I also consider an amazing friend, is someone by the name of Scott Anderson, who in our community makes a lot of heads sort of wake up because everybody knows Scott. He's the CEO of Zions Bank. Zions Bank is an amazing organization that does great things, but that's in part because of Scott's leadership. But Scott is involved in everything in this community that is meant for change and meant for advancing a greater quality of life and acceptance of many. And I could just go on, but he has been an amazing mentor to me. He has truly been there for anything that I could ask for. And, when you find people like that and you ask something of them, you give something of yourself. So it's kind of an exchange, and it's a sense of respect that you offer them and they give you. And I think that's really important. When you are sort of looking to sort of create opportunities for yourself or for your business, you have to think of it as a win-win situation where you are focusing on making sure that whatever you're entering into becomes also something that somebody else is going to benefit from. So I think that, those two people I would put way up there at the top of my list. And also my friend Burton Gordon, who, kind of got me to be in this position to utilize those great resources and people who I care for and love very much.
So share with our audience, what is one valuable lesson you wish you knew before starting your business?
I'm sorry, say that again.
What is one valuable lesson you wish you knew before starting your business?
Well, I have to say that I think that digging deeper into value proposition is, I think, something that we tend to forget. In other words, it's great to have an incredible network, to have wonderful friends, and to have ongoing relationships with people. But to be reminded, what your value is something that, at first glance seems obvious. But as you prove your value, as people bring you in and work with you because of your value, sometimes, not only does what you're doing for them change, what they're doing for themselves changes. And so you have to be able to adapt to the change that your clients have, as well as the changes that you're making with your skill sets. And you have to be able to do so with a greater sense of deliberate purpose. But I think, to answer your question more briefly, I think it's just a matter of me thinking of what I would have known when I started, was just knowing that, you're not going to have a client forever, but you can actually over-deliver if you find a client who is aligned with your skill set and with their needs. And I think that's the one thing that I would say is that it is very important to recognize this is a great client to have, but can I succeed at delivering what they need? And if you ask yourself that question honestly, and sometimes you might say, well, maybe this isn't the client I should seek, or maybe this client might not get the benefit from me that they, are looking for. Or maybe I'm moving into a realm that might sort of risk some of my other clients and the brand that I try to keep as a person of trust and who will deliver with a sense of integrity and honesty, because my brand is the trust that people have in me. And I have to always make sure that I deliver that.
One of the things that I'm hearing, Byron, is about your consulting, establishing these amazing relationships, networking, which has been like your net worth. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years, and I'm speaking about myself, it was a missed opportunity, not really understanding the value of networking. And so are there some tips that you want to offer to our audience in terms of just building those strong relationships and the power of networking?
Well, my feeling strongly is that I tend to believe, and as I said earlier, so I'll kind of reiterate, that when you are authentic and you recognize who you are and why you love what you do, you tend to find people who align with that core value. In other words, if you're passionate about food or film or the environment, you're going to find yourself in the room with people who have like-minded interests. It might not be their primary focus in life. It might not be their career, but they're sitting at the table because they want, for example, clean air. And, they might be in the banking industry, or they might be, in government or any other walk of life. But they're sitting at the table with you because you both share the same passion for something that has an importance in your life. And I think to thereby sort of answer the big question that you're asking is, how do you find this network, and how do you become available or known to potential clients? And I would just state that from experience, I've learned that being authentic, being who you want to be, and following your passion allows you to be in the space with people who will find your value because of the trust they have in you due to your shared common ground.
So, Byron, talk to a younger you. What advice would you give to a younger you?
Well, a lot of people do sometimes see and think the word consultant is, oh gosh, I can have my freedom, I can do my own thing, I can work with other people. But I think that to state that you want to be a consultant early on in age might be an aspiration, but it probably isn't the tool that you should start to put in your box. The tools that you should have in your box to achieve that ultimate goal should be the experiences in life that actually give you that breadth of experience, if you will, to be of value to folks. And so, for example, if somebody said they wanted to be a writer, that's great because, maybe they love to form and shape beautiful poetic words, but what are you writing about? Well, you write about your experiences, you write about what you know. It's very difficult to be a writer if you don't know what to write about, if you don't have a story to tell. And so I kind of think of myself as, in that sense, as a storyteller, right? So a younger self doesn't really have all the stories in life, but as you mature, the stories in your life actually develop, and you can tell them with the craft that you've actually gained over time. And that could be that maybe you studied writing, and that's fine, but you have to have something to write about. And I think that's analogous to my thought of being a consultant. Being a consultant by name is important, but being a consultant with a skill set that I have to offer is actually what shows value.
So what is the biggest achievement so far in your business?
Well, the biggest achievement, I think, is that the things that I loved doing for fun, for free, I'm now paid for to do, mostly because, I'm basically offering deliverables that are maximizing that impact. And so I think that, my ability in this community to navigate change for good is something that I've developed over time through networking with people who I mentioned, share trust and share the same values. And so, whether it's building, at one point I engaged in building a arts district with a lot of great leaders in our community. That was something like 15 years ago. And in some respects, I got involved in many aspects of that. I also am the co-chair of what's called the Utah Multicultural Commission. And that I co-chair with the Lieutenant Governor. And on our commission are members of the governor's cabinet and leaders of our community, both from the university. And it really is exciting to see how people sitting and working together for common good and for positive change has some involvement on my part. I can't claim that I'm the reason that things are the way they are, but I'm most proud to be part of a community that speaks to each other and that recognizes some of the shortcomings that we have and thinks about how to improve our lives, whether it's cultural or whether it's cultural, whether it's there are so many aspects of change that I see in my community, both here and other groups and organizations that I work with. For example, in San Francisco, there's an organization called No Bully, and we work to eradicate bullying around the country and, frankly, the world. And this has been applied here in Utah, but nationally as well. And I see the changes and I see the attitudes changing. And it's kind of hard not to feel proud of the heroes that you work with to make that happen.
Thank you for that. One of the things that I'm hearing throughout your the podcast is you're talking about positive change and how to improve our lives and like-minded. And I like what I'm hearing. And so we at Black Entrepreneur Experience, that's exactly what we do. We shine the light on the most successful Black entrepreneurs across the globe. But another one of our missions is about igniting the fire within our community to get more Black entrepreneurs. And that's about positive change and improving lives. What would you say, Byron, is some tips or strategies in reference to igniting that fire to get more individuals to be entrepreneurs?
Well, I do believe that there is, there is a greater need to search within yourself and ask, what is it that I contribute to my own life, to my own family's life? And then is part of that something I wish to share with whether it's nonprofit, whether it's for-profit, whether there's value that you can share, or an innovative approach to how to make that process better for others. I see that many people, as we improve in our society and our life through education, through experience, through opportunity, through technology, I see a rapid pace of change. And I also think it's important to assess that, the world doesn't stand still and wait for us. The world is a place of change, and changing and figuring out how we adapt to that change or how we succeed at being innovative. And to me, that's stoking the fire for people's sort of entrepreneurial, their entrepreneurial goals, I think, have to start within the self and an analysis of who you are. And I think sometimes there's a danger of thinking of aspiration and people that we look to as heroes. None of us are going to ever be a Nelson Mandela. None of us are going to, have the opportunity to be a Barack Obama or, other people that we look to who might be CEOs, or there are very few, I realize, of Black leaders in that capacity. But I think you have to look within what you resemble in those people and the elements that actually allow you to identify with that as a career choice or as a business pursuit. If you find some common threads, then there's an opportunity for you to have some like-minded success.
So one of the things you had mentioned, Byron, you talked about the rapid pace of change, and we know that that's happening in technology. Is there a technology tool or a technology platform that is a must-have for you in managing your business?
So you've asked a tech. I wouldn't say a tech retard, but I do find that one has to address their needs to advance their world with a temperament of access to technology. And I do find, I'm going to admit this, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but I do and have recently found that social media is not my greatest go-to when it comes to technology or outreach to people. I do find some communication assets are helpful, some are less. But in general, I'm not a real techie, so to speak. I do adapt to change, and I try to, understand how people better organize their lives and themselves and profit their business through technology. And so when I find that void of my personal skill set, I just have to bring on people who have that skill set to fill in the gaps for the business, because it's necessary and it's competitive and it's important. I have to remain, however, true to my creative powers, my creative skills, my networking strength, and my personal relationships, which actually yield that greater prospect of my success. And just to reiterate, I just have to find other people who have better skills and technology than I do, because frankly, Francis, it doesn't interest me. I hate to say that, but it just doesn't. It's like I see other things that excite me more, and spending time on figuring out and honing in on technological enhancements to better that. Sometimes are helpful, but most times are not.
So let's pivot. Let's talk about risk and or failure, however you want to define it. What is the worst moment in business, and what was your takeaway?
Well, I think one of the worst moments in business is when you realize you've made an error. So what do you do about that? You make a mistake, or your client isn't being served like they were expecting, or maybe there's a communication gap, or there could be some opportunities that just didn't fall into place. I think first you have to be very wise about what you find proactive, and to avoid what can become a reactive or reflexive response to issues that arise. And so I think what I've learned from those moments is knowing that I have a constant and ongoing communication that is warranted through communication with clients. And if you don't have that, then it becomes really difficult to correct things that might be going off path. To get it back on path requires a lot more heavy lifting if you don't have a process in place for those corrections. I also think one of the mistakes one makes is, recognizing or not recognizing their value proposition. If you don't really see or understand what your value is, once again, I think I've mentioned this, that you might see a client who's really exciting to have, and wouldn't anyone love to have that client? But if that client, they don't share or don't have, pain points that you can actually solve, then maybe that's not the best client to chase after. And I have found that, there are times when you have relational kind of opportunities with people or transactional opportunities. And sometimes those transactional and relational have to sort of blend together, but they can't be one all the same. Because I think if you have a completely and totally only relational sort of opportunity with a client, or you have only a transactional relationship with a client, then, you're you got to balance. You have to find that balance. And finding the balance can sometimes be a challenge.
So, Byron, tell us one parting piece of advice that you'd like to offer to our audience.
Well, sometimes I wonder how much advice I can give. I'm looking for advice. I'm going to have to listen to your podcasts more if you're asking people these grand questions. But I think the advice that I would give, and I'm sorry to be redundant, is just to know who you are and just to be authentic and to just know what that authenticity can provide, whether it's passion for something you believe in, whether it's skills that you have that have value. Just listen to yourself. I mean, it's important to read about other people. It's great to listen to Dr. Frances Richards' podcast because she has a lot more interesting people on there than me. But I think at the same time, you can listen to someone, be inspired by them, but you have to recognize that you are not them. I think that sometimes, you look at a magazine and you say, oh my gosh, that guy is in such great shape. I want to be him. Well, I'm not 6'3". I don't have blue eyes. I don't have, whatever. I don't have that DNA for that kind of athletic type or whatever. You just kind of have to recognize that, you are who you are and you are that person for a reason. And I think everyone has value. I just think you have to recognize what your value is and you have to be honest about it with yourself first. And then when you're honest with yourself, it's less difficult to convince others that they should really bring you on as a service and they should be your client.
So I have to ask you this question. If you conducted this interview, what is the one question that you wish I would have asked you and I'd like you to answer it?
Well, let's see. What is the one question that I would have asked myself? I don't know. I think I tend to be, it's an exception that I'm actually doing this podcast, but I don't like to talk about myself very much. But in terms of asking a question, I think maybe the question would be, what is it like in Utah, which people could recognize is fairly non-diverse, if you just look at it, and how does one succeed in a community that has very few Black entrepreneurs? If the population here for the Black community is something like 1.8%. And I guess the question would be, how does one, rise above and actually succeed in a place that would seem somewhat to be potentially unwelcoming? And I guess my answer would be that, I've just always celebrated who I really am. I've never pretended to be anything other than I am. And I think that there's some value to that. In addition to the skill sets and the value proposition that I talked about, I think that people are very curious and very accepting when you understand more about them as you hope they understand about you. And so I think for me, the experience I've had here is learning a lot about people who are really maybe unlike me, and it makes me a more complete person. And I think, being as complete as a person as you can really allows you to offer a lot more to others.
Thank you for that. We've come to the part of our podcast that's called the lightning round fun facts. And I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'd like you to answer very quickly. Are you ready for the fun facts lightning round?
Probably not, but let's do it.
The last movie you saw?
The last movie I saw. See, I don't watch feature films very much, but documentaries. Let's see. I think the last movie I saw was Icarus.
You relax. No, go on.
Go ahead. Icarus. It's a documentary on doping and reflects Russia and its environment. And it was at Sundance and now on Netflix.
And you relaxed doing what?
Oh, I didn't. Did I say relax?
No. This is question 2. You relaxed doing what?
I was going to say, Icarus was not a relaxing movie. So I relax cooking.
Your favorite singer or rapper?
I would say singer would have to be Sarah Vaughan.
And your favorite dance song?
This is old fashioned, but I tend to find James Brown, most of anything he does, it's hard not to move.
What food you eat every week, no matter what?
I eat quite a variety, but vegetables in season.
And your favorite month?
I would say whatever month it is.
Love that. Byron, thank you so much for joining us on Black Entrepreneur Experience. And before we part ways, what is the best way for our audience to connect with you and to support your business?
Well, I do have a website. I think if you just, Google Byron Russell LLC, you'd find it. Ideas, connections, results is my tagline. Basically, I listen to ideas that companies have. We share them. I utilize my connections, and I promise results. And that tagline is also a Google reach. If you see within my network and some of the experiences and the people I've met, the people I meet, the organizations and boards I'm on, and you see a fit, I would love to hear from you.
Thank you, Byron. That is a wrap.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening and subscribing to Black Entrepreneur Experience. We would love for you to leave a review and rating on iTunes and share with your friends. For show notes and more episodes, go to www.beepodcast.com. Join us next Wednesday, and remember, green is the new black. So keep your bank accounts and your business in the black.